Before we go off on our journey, we see a couple of familiar faces have made their way to Rainwall. First, there's that woman in black who intruded on us at the East Palace. She tells us to fuck off, and we do. Okay. Down a tier, we see our buddy Don Knotts is here. He tells us he came to Rainwall when he heard about the battle, seeking to treat any of the injured. We asked him to join us, but he died in 2006, so he's busy right now. And so our journey begins. But first, let's learn about a video game. Probably the first thing that people learn about the Suikoden series is the number of characters you're able to recruit throughout the games. 5 is no exception to this, featuring 108 companions, around 70 of which can be used in traditional battles. In addition to some of the choices in the intro of the game, the number of characters we recruit directly affects the ending of the game. For this playthrough, we're getting all of them. Hopefully. Many characters require extremely specific, precise, and sometimes arbitrary requirements to be recruited. I've gotten them all before though, so we should be good. Most characters can be used in regular battles, but some are dubbed support characters. We can bring these characters into our party, but they don't fight, instead providing unique bonuses or conveniences while they're there. Similarly, most characters can be used in army battles, but some are specialized for this and some can only be used in army battles. For now, we'll focus on how characters function in regular battles. A character's strengths and weaknesses are largely defined by 3 factors: their statistics, their skills, and their equipment. We'll go over stats first. A character's attack stat determines how much damage they do with their basic physical attacks. A character's attack is a combination of their base attack stat and the attack granted by their weapon, which, if you'll recall, can be upgraded. The magic stat is a representation of a character's magical power and is added to any numerical values of a spell they cast. A character's defense stat actually refers exclusively to their physical defense, and is mostly a representation of their armor. Characters do differ slightly in base defense, but this stat is far more affected by what equipment a character is able to equip. Magic defense is defense against magic. This can also be affected by armor, but to a lesser extent. Magic defense varies much more between characters and goes hand in hand with their rune affinities, which we'll get into later. Technique affects a few things, namely a character's accuracy, chance to critical strike, and their chance to parry. Note, however, that not every character can parry, depending on their weapon. Accuracy is self-explanatory, determining how much a character can hit. Though this is based off the technique stat, there are several effects in equipment that only affect accuracy and not the other mechanics governed by technique. Evasion directly opposes accuracy, reducing a character's chance to be hit. Speed determines turn order. I don't know the exact calculations that go into it, but turn order is not set entirely by speed, with a factor of randomness. That said, it seems as if eventually, a character can get fast enough to always go first regardless of this. Finally, luck acts much in the same way as it does in many RPGs. Basically, every time there's a random factor in a calculation, such as critting or evading, luck adds a small bonus in your favor. Also, like in other RPGs, it's hard to exactly determine the advantages of luck, but it's good to have, I guess. We increase these stats by leveling a character up, but we can also affect them along with other factors with skills. After every successful encounter, the characters we use will acquire skill points, a separate progression system from experience points. In addition, we receive party skill points, which are skill points we can use on any character regardless of their personal point total. We use these skill points at skill trainers littered throughout the world. Characters can have 2 skills equipped at any one time, making it important that we figure out what we want a character to do. By training in a skill, we increase their ranks, thus increasing their effects. The catch here is that characters' max ranks differ. For instance, while a magic-oriented character might only be able to obtain a C rank in a physical skill, a physical fighter might be able to go all the way to the highest rank, SS. Every character has access to common skills. These consist of stamina, which increases health points, attack, which increases attack, defense increases defense, magic defense increases magic defense, technique increases technique, and agility increases speed, but also their chance to hit multiple times in a single action. Vitality increases the damage a character does when they do a critical strike. Magic increases magical power, or how much damage or healing they do with magic. Finally, incantation increases the speed with which a character can cast spells, important for healers. In addition to these skills, many characters have unique or just rarer skills that they can learn. For instance, Xyleeds can learn the long throw skill, which gives her ranged attacks a chance to hit multiple enemies. Finally, there are epic skills, which have to be found throughout the game as treasure. Generally, these are skills that combine 2 or more common skills, though to a slightly lesser effect than using a single common skill. Equipment in Suikoden V is mostly about what kind of armor a character can equip. As I've said before, weapons cannot be changed but can be upgraded. A character's weapon determines their optimal range, but also whether they can parry or counterattack, and their max number of hits. Whenever you perform an attack action, a character has a chance to hit more than once. Generally, quicker characters have a higher maximum number of bonus attacks. As for armor, pieces are generally separated into light, medium, or heavy variants. In these, however, many other specifications exist, and characters vary on what they can equip. For instance, a character might only be able to normally equip light armor, but may have an exception for chainmail armor pieces. Characters have a head slot, a body slot, an arm slot, and a foot slot, and they can actually have differing kinds of armor they're allowed to equip in each of those slots. So, needless to say, it can get pretty complicated in determining what kinds of armor a character can equip. Generally, however, heavier armor gives better defense while lowering a character's speed stat. Lighter armors obviously give less defense, but often provide other bonuses such as to magical power. Speaking of magical power, the final aspect of characters I'm going to cover here is the rune system. I've already mentioned that runes provide a character with several benefits should they be equipped, most notably the ability to cast magic. Characters have a potential of 3 rune slots they can acquire as they level up, but the level they receive them differs, and some do not receive some slots at all. In addition, some characters have a rune slot that is fixed, meaning that a character comes equipped with a rune and you cannot change it. These can sometimes be unique runes, but not always. For instance, Xyleid's Wind Rune is not unique in any way, but is fixed to her nonetheless. Runes all fall into specific categories that you can see here. Note that some runes share the name of the category, but typically aren't the only rune to use that category. For instance, the Water Rune is in the Water category, but is the most basic of the runes in that category. Characters have rune affinities, which determine how well they can both use and defend against these categories. This is the primary means of determining which runes are best on which characters. A character with a C affinity in fire is going to suck at casting spells compared to someone with an A. And finally, characters have varying numbers of spell usages. Each rune that provides spells has 4 tiers with a different spell on each tier. This is important because characters differ on the number of times they can use these spells in a battle. Typically, this means spellcasting characters can use spells more often, with some of the other characters not even being able to use any higher tier spells. Whew! So, now that we know all that, we can get into the characters we're using now. First is, of course, the most important character, us. It's us, the protagonist. The prince is required to be in your battle party at all times, so it's a good thing he's pretty good. And no, the game isn't over if he dies, you just res him. Now, character stats go up every time you level, so I can't really give you exact stat distributions. Thankfully, however, Blaze Feeler has a guide on game FAQs that has all the characters' stat totals at level 60, which gives us a good idea on their strengths and weaknesses. Thus, when I show a character's stats, I'm going to go with a simple scale of low to average to high. If a stat is very low or very high, then the character is really bad or good in that stat. As for the prince, his stats are very evenly distributed while also having a high total. This makes him incredibly versatile, and he can be built into either a physical attacker or a mage with just a change in equipment and skills. He can only wear medium armor, however, and while his HP is good, it's not the highest out there. About the only job he can't do very well is a frontline tank, but he's very much a jack of all trades otherwise. His skills are amazing, having an A in every basic skill with an S in attack, technique, vitality, and magic defense. I find it best to equip him with attack and technique, but he works just as well with basically any combination. His weapon, the Tri-Nunchaku, is very good. Medium range, playing into his versatility, can parry and counterattack, and has a high combo count. Medium armor gives him decent protection while retaining his speed, but as the protagonist, he might get some special treatment in that area later on. His rune slots and affinities are a bit complicated to explain right now. At the moment, he only has 1 rune slot. We will get another one, but his right hand is fixed, and I can't really tell you why yet. I'll just say for now, it's not a bad thing that it's fixed. His affinities make him fairly well balanced. I find he works with more support-oriented runes like water, but it's really personal preference here. We also have Leon, who is actually very similar to the prince. Basically everything I just said for the prince also applies to Leone, including the fact that she has a fixed rune slot that I can't really get into right now. Her weapon can parry, but cannot counterattack though, making her even less of a good frontline option. She does make an excellent healer with an S rank in incantation, however, and can still put out decent physical damage. Okay, are you ready for the game to continue yet? Good. Now our destination is Raftfleet, but we're actually going to go the opposite direction and return to Hod. Why? Well, I just wanted to hear that banger of a song some more, of course. But also we'll be recruiting our first character not given to us by the story. As soon as we enter, we go into this house with a blue gate, where we immediately get attacked by things. They're all named after the tonal scale. Well, they're easy, going down really quickly. After the battle, a short, portly man whose home we just invaded comes running, yelling at us for beating up what he calls members of his orchestra. He calls us a mediocrity and says his name is Cornelio. The things we beat up are apparently called Do-Re-Mi elves, and Cornelio here is training them to be part of his musical act. He forces us outside where we find one of the elves we so thoughtlessly scared away. What we have to do here is not touch the elf, at all, or we'll kill it. We make everyone but Cornelio defend, who uses a unique spell called Fugue to, for lack of a better term, tame the elf. In this case, Remi Fa. Afterwards, Cornelio calls us mean names again and says he can't sense any of the other elves around. He says it's our job to find the rest of them now, and he intends to stick with us until we do. And with that, we, befriend Cornelio. Whenever we see this phrase, it means we've recruited a character. They're ours now. In this case, we actually get two, as the elves we recruit with Cornelio can be used in battle as well. As for Cornelio, he calls us mediocrities a lot, but he's actually pretty mediocre himself. He seems to be intended to be a mage, but his weapon is short range, which is not typically where you want your mages to be, and even in terms of his magic, he's fairly average. The true allure of the fabulous Cornelio is, of course, his musical talent. He's the only character able to use the Do-Re-Mi rune that's fixed to his head slot. Fun note, this is the only rune in the game associated with the sound affinity. Makes you wonder why they included it at all. At first, this rune just allows him to tame his Do-Re-Mi elves, but eventually he gets access to some actually useful abilities through it. The problem with this rune is, in order to use those actually useful abilities, you have to have Do-Re-Mi elves in your party. The more elves you have, the higher level spells Cornelio can use. The issue is that the Do-Re-Mi elves they're bad. They're just bad. I'm not even going to bother going through all their stats. They can't equip armor, they can't use runes, they can't even use skills. The only way to improve their statistics beyond leveling them up is by having Cornelio in the party equipped with his perfect pitch skill. They're all short range and generally just there as a gimmicky collection side quest. Still, I suppose it would be fun to see how much use you could get out of them in Cornelio, so I'm glad they're at least in the game. Until you get those elves, however, Cornelio is best used as a support mage. It'll be thick as fuck! Before we leave Hod, we stop by the appraisal shop where we see the appraiser looking at an artist's latest piece. He calls it extraordinary and gives the man 3,000 potch for it. After the artist leaves, however, the appraiser calls it awful before realizing we can hear him. He introduces himself as Bastan and as a con artist. It seems he's more of an opportunist, however, as he laments he's basically had to sell out to Lord Barrow's eccentric taste to keep his business afloat. He thanks us for listening. As we move towards Raftfleet, we stop at this specific area on the world map to run around for no reason whatsoever. Eventually, we come across another Do-Re-Mi elf? Who would have thought? This is how we'll find the rest of the elves. They appear as random encounters in specific areas. In this case, we find Fa So La and recruit them. Fa So La is just as useless as Remi Fa. And finally, we follow the river until we find Raftfleet. Despite changing location, the layout of Raftfleet remains the same. Our first stop is to the inn, where we see a man enjoying his meal of fish. We talk to the chef standing by him and learn that the chef's name is Retso. Tarnation! The customer says he's getting full, which prompts a young girl to come out and chastise him. This is Retso's daughter, Shun Min. The customer, admonished for his non-fish eating ways, returns to his meal. We make our way to the Dahaka to meet with Raja and Kisara. They lead us to a back room where we can sit and talk about all that's happened. We learn that the people of Rathfleet already have a good idea of what's going on, and Raja guesses why we're here. She tells us the Godwins are already amassing soldiers, not just because they're soldiery people, but to oppose us and the Barrows. Raja then, unfortunately, denies Rathfleet's alliance with us, stating that they do not wish to be pawns to aristocracy. It isn't done with malice, however. She understands why we've had to join with the Barrows, and she gives us advice on what our next move should be, namely helping Lord Lake. If you haven't picked up on it yet, Lord Barrows, despite his family's more conservative attitude towards militarization, isn't all that trusted among the royal family and those adjacent to them. After our sit-down, we talk to Raja a bit, where she ponders why Salem seems to be more interested in us than Siledes, since she would be a much better candidate for rule in Felena's matriarchal society. We assume that it's strictly because of that he's using us as his face for his revolution, since not even the Barrows and Godwins want a repeat of the war for the throne 20 years past. As we leave the Dahaka, we're stopped by Kisara. She says that though Rathfleet cannot help us, she feels indebted since we essentially saved her family by bringing Log and Lund back here rather than sending them to Solfelena, where they may have been caught up in the Godwin coup. She tells us that we'll need a boat to get to Lord Lake easily, and since boats is what Rathfleet is all about, she offers Log and Lund's services in this matter. We spend some time upgrading Cornelio's weapon before heading to a pier where we find Log and Lund.
Oh, the prince!
Oh,
Look, we offer our sincere...
too bad the Queen and Farad had to kick the bucket.
Hey!
Ah! That really hurt. What the hell did you do that for,
Shut up, Pop! How come you gotta be so insensitive? Can't you think about how the prince must feel?
I thought I was thinking about how he was feeling. I did say too bad, you know.
And that's why I told you to shut up.
Excuse me. Really, please you two stop.
Oh.
Sorry about that, Prince. So, I'm thinking you probably heard from the wife about this already.
If it weren't for you guys, Prince, me and Pop would have probably been in big trouble. So we want to get the chance to repay you. Sorry, I mean let us repay you, Your Highness.
Please. Oh, all right. Please, sir.
Prince?
Yes, you're a prince, Prince! In Rathfleet, we always repay our debts twice over, you know? We're gonna do our best.
All right, then. You gotta let us know if there be anything we can do to help you, okay? Well, I'm thinking there's some stuff we can't do, but if we can do it, we're gonna do it.
We tell the eager duo we need to head to Lord Lake.
Oh, you do, huh? Then we're gonna help you get there. Hop on board and watch your step. Lon, we're shoving off.
Aye, aye!
Is that the glow room?
Not bad, you think?
Hold on tight, you guys!
We arrive at a wharf north of Lord Lake. Log and Lund tell us to keep to the mountain range so we can steer clear of a Godwin fortress that's situated close to the town. Lund then informs us that she's coming along. Log tells her not to boon us, and we head once more to Lord Lake. The enemies we face on our trip are much like the ones we faced before, but a bit tougher since we don't have George babysitting us. Still, the hardest thing here is keeping our Do-Re-Mi elves alive so they can get some experience, but they make decent meat shields regardless. Note that even though Lund joined our party, we did not get the befriend text box, which means she's not a permanent companion, at least not yet. As such, to avoid spoilers, I won't be going over character stats and whatnot until we see that text box. We arrive at Lord Lake to find it's just as miserable as before. We talk to Talgel, the only person that seems to like us here, and tell him of our situation. He thanks us for our intentions, but says it's a fruitless endeavor. The people of Lord Lake have suffered too much at the hands of our family and could never follow us. He does point out, however, that, much like Rathfleet, that he can at least ensure that they would never join with the Godwins. The fortress we passed by that seemed to be damming the water was damming the water. Talgil tells us that the name of the fortress is Hatred Fortress, which, I mean, come on, Godwin, you gotta at least put up the appearance that you're not evil. Talking to our, friends in Lord Lake, we find not much has changed with them either. Ghosh at least tries to be sympathetic, but the doctor we talked to last time, she ain't even trying. Like, come on, lady, my parents just died. Shit. Left with nothing to do here, we return to the wharf and tell Log to take us back to Rathfleet. We say goodbye to Log and Lund, with them again ensuring us their boating services. It's worth noting that the game can get pretty vague on where to go from here on out, very much like older JRPGs of this kind. For the most part, as long as you use context clues and logic, you can figure it out, but the game will often just not outright tell you where you need to go. In this case, since we've exhausted both our options for recruitment in Rathfleet and Lord Lake, we return to Rainwall to report our failure. On the way, we pass by a big hole called Big Hole. We tell Salem of how our journey went, and he seems fairly unperturbed by it. Much more important to him is the flag that he's having designed for us by the artist of Hod. We let him handle it. After a short discussion, he asks us if we want to fuck his daughter, which is weird, so we head to bed, but not before we stop by Urim's room to see he's painted a picture of our 10-year-old sister, and these people are weird. Later that night, we converse with George and Sileeds, with Sileeds becoming very frustrated with Salem and his orders. George figures that he just wants us and Sileeds to be figureheads, which is something Sileeds expresses she's tired of being. Eventually, Lucerina enters the room and asks us if her father has asked us anything strange. Turns out he also asked her to fuck us, so yeah, Solemn is kinda keen on that idea. The party surmises that obviously this is all just a power grab to Salem and a way for him to appear like a hero at the end of it. Lucerina won't have it and has come to warn us of his conniving ways. Unfortunately, we don't really have any other choice than to go along with his plans, as the Godwins are too powerful to take on our own. George laments that we really need someone on our side to help plan our actions, a tactician if you will. This prompts Sileeds to remember she knows of a brilliant tactician that could aid us in just this way. A Lady Mercedes was once in service to Queen Arshtat during the Armés invasion years ago, and it was largely thanks to her that Farid and Raja were able to repel them. Unfortunately, this strategist is currently locked away in Agate Prison, put there after questioning Arshtat during one of her moments of being controlled by the Sun Rune. While this woman could be of great help to us, there isn't much we can do with her being locked up. As the party discusses this, it appears as if Sileeds becomes distracted. Suddenly saying she's tired, she gets up and leaves the room. The next morning, Leone informs us that Sileeds is still sleeping and George has gone out somewhere. We're left with just us and Leone to figure out what to do. And what do? Make a prison break, of course! We talk to Lucerina and ask her if she knows where Agate Prison is located. She says it's on an islet in the Phaedos and is only accessible by boat. Good thing we knows a guy that knows about boats, huh? Talking to her again shows us that we can change our party by speaking with her. In this case, we take along Cornelio and his 2 elves. We also see that there's 4 spots that are under Entourage. These are extra slots that we can put characters. They won't enter battle with us, but we can keep them there in reserve or to use any support abilities they might have. Again, the game never tells you directly, but we can figure out that we have to make a dash for Log and Lund and Rathfleet so they can take us to this Agate Prison and see if we can help this famed tactician. The 2 are surprised when we ask them to take us to a prison, but Log quickly assumes that we're going to break someone out, which, you know, you're right, Log, but I think that says a lot about you. Log seems way too excited to help us and we set off. As we arrive at the enormous prison, the party sees that the Godwins already have the place staffed and guarded tightly. There's no way we can get in from the front, so Log tells us he might know of another way in.